Football season is underway, so now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's free bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just sign up with promo code BLUEWIRE. FanDuel is great because it has all of your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. The app is safe, secure, and easy to use, and you get your winnings paid fast. So sign up today with promo code BLUEWIRE for your no-sweat first bet. Make every moment more this season with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, or Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700 or visit KS Gambling Help in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. The Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789 in Tennessee, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming, or visit www.1800gambler.net in West Virginia.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to talk about Michigan State's 70-57 win at the Breslin Center over the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. But before we begin, let's take care of a little bit of business. First, I want to thank Corey Schwartz, who's our newest Scott Skiles supporting on Patreon. Thank you so much, Corey, and all the other supporters on Patreon who are making monthly contributions to the show. You know, I don't think I really realized, Rod, before I came onto the show in the spring. I mean, this is a busy show. This is a ton of episodes we do, and you guys who support the show either with one-time donations via PayPal or Venmo, or the monthly supporters, or sponsoring the show. Makes a huge difference. It makes it a lot easier for us to advertise and to actually get all the equipment and do all this stuff. And so, thank you so much. I'm glad you appreciate the product and you think we provide a good value for you, because man, it is a lot of work. It's fun.
It's a grind.
We are truly in the grind, and thankfully Michigan State's winning a little bit now too, which makes it a lot easier to get through the grind. So if you do want to support the show, please head on over to tffinots.com/support or just the Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. There you can find options and ways to support the show. Speaking of supporting the show, talk about our sponsor, Nudge Printing, run by two Michigan State alum, Gabe and Brittany. I got my, so I have a confession to make. I went to the Michigan game and it was a whiteout and I had nothing white to wear. I mean, I could have worn just like a random white t-shirt, I suppose, but I didn't have any. I had like gray stuff. I had lots of green stuff. I had no Michigan State white gear. And you have a whiteout like every year, and I guess I just never bothered getting any. So anyway, I got a white sweatshirt now from Nudge Printing, so I am set. It's actually I don't know if you're familiar with it. The great thing about Nudge Printing is they have all those vintage things. We talked about it before, where you just like these old either basketball or football, like the old Gruff Sparty and stuff. And it's like this Gruff Sparty dunking a basketball. He only has like his sword and stuff. It's really pretty cool. But I kind of look at that and it sort of rings a bell, but I don't know if it was even before our time, that emblem. I don't remember, but it's pretty cool.
Of Gruff Sparty with the sword?
With the sword, like in a basketball dunking.
Yeah, that's old.
Yeah, that's like, I think 70s or something, right?
That's long before the 70s.
Yeah. So it's super cool. The sweatshirt's actually really nice because it's really, really soft, which, most sweatshirts are kind of like, I don't know, stiff or just kind of bulky. So it's really kind of nice. It's a little bit lighter weight, and so you can wear it under coats and things like that, and it's pretty comfortable. So that's pretty cool. I've been very impressed.
I got my Gruff Sparty t-shirt today, by the way, and it looks great.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell it's the nice screen printing like we did with, our shirt and stuff. And so I never paid any attention to that stuff before until talking to you about, since with all your deep t-shirt experience.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal to the people that are buying it sometimes.
So it's nice and durable. I also got a Sparty car decal, which I have not yet taken out of the package and put on the car, but so that's the next thing. So you can get your decals, you can get Sparty gear, and like I said before, 60 other schools, or 60 total schools. All the Michigan schools except the one in Ann Arbor are available. As far as I can tell, like Michigan Tech, Northwoods University, Alma, Albion. I mean, it's like all of them. It's pretty impressive. And then I guess the other thing to say is 600 5-star reviews. It's a great company. We're so happy to have them on as sponsors. And for listeners of the show, you can get 20% off your order if you type in the coupon code Final4 when you go to nudgeprinting.com. All right, so let's talk about this game with Michigan State and Rutgers. I have to admit, I was far more pessimistic about this game than you were. You're pretty optimistic about their chances. Great crowd at the Breslin Center tonight. It was a little bit slow getting in, but once it filled in, they were into the game. Even when Michigan State was struggling early, again, sort of the same story, just a slow start to be in the game. And especially what's surprising is Rutgers getting lots of easy looks early in the game. The first, 5-6 possessions. I mean, just lots of layups and dunks and just kind of back cutting. And so Michigan State was just discombobulated out there. And then I think then Michigan settled in. Offensively did pretty well. I mean, 12 3-pointers. So our concern about that sort of is not, well, at least my semi-concern about that. The one thing about the game that Michigan State was obliterated on the defensive boards. I mean, Rutgers with 18 offensive rebounds, a 43% offensive rebounding rate. And even despite that, Michigan State wins by 13 because as great as Rutgers was on the boards, they were about that bad from behind the arc. They were sitting at 6% most of the game until Spencer hit that last three with 10 seconds left.
End,
yeah,
right.
That gave them their second. So they were 2 of 17. I mean, they were just putrid. And then, Rutgers gets lots of steals. They had 8, but Michigan State had 9. Walker and Akins both with 4. And Jaxon Kohler finished a double-double. He actually had 4 blocks. They credited the last block, I think, to Hauser. So really good game from him. And all right, I'm going to read 4 numbers. You tell me the significance of these numbers, and this is how we'll start the show here. All right, 29, 31, 31, and 32. What do those numbers mean to you?
29, 31, 31, and 22.
32.
And 32.
Yeah.
It's not coming to me immediately. What
those are the minutes played by the 4 starters who were averaging 36 minutes a game before.
Yeah.
So there's rest given to. I mean, Joey Hauser only played 32. I mean, only. That's like normal starter minutes, and it sort of forced Michigan State in a number of times. I think. I don't know. I guess you just say kind of like a weird rotate. You had Sissoko and Cooper out there. Cooper playing the 4, and
there was also
to work.
There was also
Kohler
a stretch
and Cooper
where
too,
it was
right?
Cooper and Kohler.
Yeah, right.
And they with Trey Holloman, and they played well during that
I think
stretch.
they even extended the lead a little bit, just a few points.
Look, it was, and it's a smart thing to point that out because given where MSU is, again, another game on Sunday, and it's on the road at IU. So it was really important to get those kinds of contributions from their reserves. I mean, I look at somebody like Carson Cooper. He didn't do much statistically tonight. I mean, I'm not even sure if he registered. Okay, so he had
a rebound.
He had 1 rebound, 2 personal fouls, and he had a block. Yeah. He did get credited with a block. So not a lot of contributions in 9 minutes statistically, but Michigan State didn't suffer when he was out there. By the way, out there playing the 4. I'm not sure if he had any minutes at the 5 tonight. If he did, they were brief.
He did, but it was brief. You're right.
And I think that was, look, with Malik Hall out, we don't know how long it'll be. I was encouraged to see, by the way, Malik going through the handshake routine around the arena at the end of the game, looking at least like he was moving very nicely. So for the next to nothing that's worth. But I think even contributions like that mattered. Obviously Kohler is the one that has everybody stand up and take notice because it was his best game as an MSU Spartan by far.
Oh, easily.
I mean, especially when you adjust for the level of opponent, it's a top 25 opponent. Both the worthless AP poll and the better metric, analytical polls have them in the top 25 pretty firmly. So that was great. Trey Holloman, I thought, played very well. I thought he was good defensively. He had the one nice take to the rim and finish. And I thought he was part of what was a team-wide outstanding job moving the basketball. I mean, MSU's ball movement after, the last couple games, Illinois, in large part because of the way they opted to play defensively. And then even in the Purdue game, I didn't feel MSU's ball movement was at quite its normal level. And to be effective offensively against Rutgers, you have to do that. And Michigan State did it. And Trey Holloman was a big part of that. So all three of those guys really contributed. And that's crucial. So I'm glad you highlighted that because I might not have started this early with that, but it is important because, they're in this just what seems to be just an incredibly condensed schedule. And you got to get those main guys some blows. And when you can do it and you're not suffering for it, you're not paying a price for it, which they really didn't tonight, so much the better.
We had a very long preseason preview show for Michigan State, as always. And I'm certain we did not talk about Carson Cooper playing the 4 this season.
No, we did. I'll tell you where we mentioned it. Not in the preview, but we did talk about it. We had a brief discussion about the scrimmage at Tennessee, and there was some footage that showed Carson and Jaxon Kohler on the floor at the same time. So I'm going to give us credit because I didn't think they'd necessarily have to go to it, but the thought was he does have exceptionally good footwork, and that gives you a chance at Michigan State. Look, the deal is when he's out there at the 4, the offense is not what you really ideally want it to be, right? Because you now only have 3 shooters at best. And you're not going to be able to stretch the floor. It's going to make for a lot of congestion in the paint. But, defensively, they can hang with that lineup. And they did tonight. I mean, Rutgers didn't make them pay for it.
No. I would say watching them on offense, the first stint where they had Carson play the 4, they just looked discombobulated offensively. I mean, there weren't as many scorers out there, but the second time it looked a little more fluid and it looked like, they were able to do some damage. And, it's encouraging, of course, to see that Joey can get a blow because he was the one I'm most worried about getting worn down to the nub because you need his shooting and you worry if he's got tired legs that when you need him at the end of the game, he might not be there. So it was really good that he was able to get a lot of rest for this game.
I agree. That was a big deal. So there are a lot of elements of this thing to talk about and I want to before we turn to the keys. So,
right.
Why don't we start with Kohler? I mean, we've already referenced it, but
so let me start actually, if that's okay. So before the game, I met with Graham Couch. We were talking about things and we were both saying, it just seems like Kohler is defensively, he's been struggling. He doesn't seem to be able to have, I don't know, say athleticism or the footwork or whatever it is. And just, you started seeing like, maybe this is just not going to work out for him. And so if there's someone who might leave, it's like a surprising person to leave the team, maybe not next year, but the year after, maybe Kohler's the guy. And then he just goes and posts a double. And all that offense we talked about for, the whole season, especially early in the season, we finally saw it today that, 6 and 9 from the floor. And I mean, he was outstanding. And you know what, Rod, he can actually rebound.
Yeah. I've been having that discussion with, and I don't know whether I've mentioned it here or not, but, on some of the message boards, there's been an insistence by a handful of people that Jaxon Kohler is the worst rebounding big man Tom Izzo's ever recruited. And before tonight, I told people that was insane. That actually the worst one just left this offseason. No offense to Julius Marble, but in my view, he is. And there's statistics to back that up. Yeah, it's funny how against a world-beating rebounding team that was just kicking Michigan State's ass, who is the guy that semi-solves the problem on the defensive glass? If you had Jaxon Kohler, raise your hand. There won't be a lot of hands raised.
Not mine either, I admit, yeah.
Look, if I had been there for that conversation, I would have told you both to cool your jets.
Yeah.
He's halfway through his freshman season. And the reason I say that, though, is this bit. Yes, he is not particularly athletically gifted, and that creates a problem in pick and roll defense primarily. But also he hasn't gone through a full off season rather, of weight training and all the stuff that should allow him to at least be somewhat better in the post as well. So he's getting it from every end defensively. There's nothing he's been doing well defensively so far. But the things that you consistently hear about him are that he wants to be great. His work ethic has not, and there's been, one guy that there have been questions about his work ethic this season, about how badly he wants to be good. You don't hear that about Jaxon Kohler. That even when he's struggling, they've said, he keeps working at it. And if you do that, the odds are that at some point he's going to get there. And the reason I say that is I have seen so many guys at Michigan State who come into the program and don't seem like they're going to be physically capable of doing what needs to be done at all positions. I mean, I can go back and we can talk about Denzel Valentine, Bryn Forbes. I could talk about Derek Nix at the same position Jaxon plays, where, as a freshman and even a sophomore, man, he couldn't play pick and roll defense to save his life. He just wasn't in good enough shape. Over time, though, as those guys improve their bodies, but what all those guys that I just mentioned have in common is they all work their asses off. And if you do that, you will give yourself a chance to get better defensively, because there are some things in terms of being able to understand how to prepare, what they'll talk about when they talk about getting into the scout. I saw Jaxon Kohler interviewed whenever it was that maybe it was after the Illinois game, Carson Cooper had his breakout,
right,
where he got interviewed, and he talked about how he knew that what he had to do was keep getting into the scout, meaning watching tape, watching video, learning tendencies, getting prepared to play the opposition the way Michigan State wants to play it. And that changes some from game to game. Like, for example, in the Purdue game, you might have seen, because Michigan State didn't really respect Edey as a threat to slip to the basket, the big would come so far out on the hedge that he was actually parallel to Edey. He wasn't facing the either basket. He was perpendicular to them, because they were that hell-bent on denying the ball handler, the shooter, the potential shooter, and they weren't worried about Edey rolling because he's too immobile. That's a tweak, but you have to be prepared to execute that. And so, given what I've heard about Jaxon Kohler, I'm not worried about him in the long run. Now, did I see this game coming tonight? Absolutely not. But I think he's going to get there. How good defensively he'll be, hey, that remains to be seen. But I believe that over time, he has every chance of getting to a level where he's functional. And if that happens, then all of the offensive gifts that we saw on display tonight, that starts to really, really make itself felt. I just thought he was, here's another note on tonight. In retrospect, we maybe could have seen this coming at least a little bit in this respect. I think that compared to a lot of other teams MSU faces, Rutgers has a hard time really punishing you on pick and roll. And the reason I say that is the guards that they run it with either aren't good shooters, Caleb McConnell, or they just don't take the three a lot. Paul Mulcahy, even though he's pretty efficient, he doesn't shoot a lot of them. They don't seem to run much of that with Spencer.
Right.
You know, he's an off-ball threat that they don't get into involved in pick and roll. So point being, this is a game where Jackson's deficiencies there don't show up as much. And so then you're just down to pure post play. And, you know, he did okay. He hung in there. I mean, the shot blocks were great, but I mean, even besides that, I don't know, did Jackson, I think he got called for one foul maybe in this game.
He had a foul.
He had the one.
He had the one that was originally given to Hauser, and then they
Hauser,
awarded
that's
it
right,
to Kohler. But yeah, I mean, I think the blocks were more a function of the fact that he was positioned well, right? Like
Absolutely.
That was why he got the blocks.
Yeah, and so, you know, and I'm not trying to downplay the performance at all. It was fantastic, but this was a game in retrospect, I think you could see with the way Rutgers played, that was maybe built a little more than some others for him to be able to be effective, because Rutgers wasn't going to test you in the same way, you know, like say Purdue would. You know, in the Purdue game, even though he didn't play well, Braden Smith is a threat. Foster Lawyer, if they put him in pick and roll, is absolutely a threat. You know, so he's going to get other teams that have Wisconsin, you know, other teams that they've played recently. There was more of a test in that part of the game for him than there was tonight. But man, just all the way around, I mean, what a performance. And you have to be so happy for the kid, because I'm sure he's been going through it, even though he always seems to have an up attitude. You still have to believe he's been going through some things, because he's used to being successful. And, you know, it's been tough. And then lately, you know, I'm sure he's been likely hearing some stuff about how Carson Cooper maybe is passing him in the rotation. You know, none of that can be easy, but for him to stay in it. And you didn't hear it, but Jim Jackson on the broadcast made a really good point in this respect too. He said the fact that Jaxon Kohler, who hasn't been playing a lot, was able to play 23 minutes tonight and was still fresh at the end of the game, was still playing hard. That's a tribute to the work that he's obviously done, keeping himself ready for this kind of moment, right? And you can't give a kid in his situation any bigger tribute than that when his number got called, he was ready. Conversely, you know, and it's never been my MO to come after kids, and I'm still rooting for him. And I want to see him find a way to turn this around. But Pierre Brooks does not look like he's been doing that.
Yeah.
You know, he's getting more of an opportunity, or you can tell Izzo wants to give it to him, and he doesn't look ready for it, whereas Jackson was ready tonight. So hats off to Jackson. While we're speaking about the five, one quick word on Mady Sissoko, because, of course, a lot of people online, I'm sure a lot of people in the gym were upset about the way that he in particular seemed to be just getting hammered on the glass. Yeah, and that's one that I don't have a good answer or excuse for. I think that Omori is a very, very good player. We talked about that. We knew they were going to, as a team and him individually, were going to come at Michigan State on the offensive glass. None of that was a surprise. But even having said that, there's no excuse for it. I mean, it was just not a good day for Mady. But there is one thing I saw that I did notice that they're going to have to figure out here pretty quickly, because it's not the first time we've seen it lately. early in the game, you were talking about how Rutgers got off to that strong start. And a part of it was they got Omarui loose on a couple of
Twice.
slips.
Yeah.
For dunks. And that kid dunks. I think he's got like 40 some dunks this year. So that's standard operating procedure for him. But that's not the first time of late that we've seen Marty taken advantage of that way. Now, I have been a big proponent of the job Marty Sissoko has done as a pick and roll defender, and I still am. I'm not off that train at all. But there is something that opponents are seeing. You know, people always talk about scouting tendencies, and they mostly think about scouting offensive tendencies. You know, is a guy, you know, one hand dominant? Does he always want to go to his left? Those kinds of things. But there are defensive traits too. And I believe that opponents are picking up on that because Illinois did it. Purdue really didn't because, if I recall correctly, because again, Edey is not much of a role threat. Although actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think they did get him loose for one too.
He did. And I think it was early as well.
Yep. So there's something that Marty is doing. And, obviously Tom Izzo knows that, but they're going to have to adjust to it. I'm sure they will. Because if I see it, for certain they've seen it.
For sure.
So, and again, in a game like this one, as Jaxon Kohler proved, there really wasn't a need to get overly aggressive because the guys Rutgers is running pick and roll with aren't the same kind of threats you typically see in that role. So that's an adjustment Marty's going to have to make. But I'm not worried. He had a rough night, but Marty Sissoko over the course of the season, just as recently as the Purdue game, the job that Michigan State did on the glass against an even better rebounding team than Rutgers was phenomenal. Yeah. And Marty Sissoko had a big role in that. So if anybody's upset, cool your jets. It's one game.
Yeah, I think he just had trouble securing the ball for whatever reason.
That too. Yes, there were a lot of balls that were jarred loose. And look, give Rutgers credit because Rutgers is aggressive and they play hard and they're physical. Yeah. They make it tough. But he's still got to be better.
Right? Yeah, no question. Because you're playing such great defense and then giving up second and even third opportunities in the same possession.
It was maddening. Absolutely maddening. That first possession in the second half, they got 4 shots.
Yeah, the guy behind me, he was not happy.
Yeah, I'll bet.
and there were so many fouls they weren't calling on Rutgers that.
Yeah, it's I gotta say, this is, and I didn't think it was as egregious as the Purdue game by any means, but look, Rutgers is a physical team, and the statistics on the season tell us, it's not a Wisconsin deal where officials just kind of swallow the whistle because Wisconsin is coached very well to make most of their contact below the belt, and it's apparently hard for officials to see. And I don't mean that in a cheating way. No. I just mean literally that's how they always taught it under Bo Ryan. I believe Greg Gard does the same thing. So that in a game against Wisconsin, it's going to be physical, but yet you're probably not going to see them get called for a ton of fouls. That's not Rutgers. That's not Rutgers' profile. So the fact that we've gone 2 straight home games with Michigan State not getting any benefit of the whistle at all. If the Big Ten office wants to say that from now on every game is going to be called perfectly straight up, fine, I'm with it. But I just saw that game in Champaign-Urbana. And a week ago, and if I've got to accept that as the way things go, then there ought to be some kind of benefit that Michigan State gets at Breslin, and they just did not in these 2 games. They just didn't happen.
I agree. I was telling you before, I just don't think we get a big home whistle at Breslin. And you mentioned it's the way we play. I think that probably somewhat to do with it.
Yeah, that is a contributor. But
this team played more physically than Michigan State, and there was no benefit of the whistle for us. There were so many times you could call over the back, but whatever.
Yeah, and the thing is, this Michigan State team also is frankly a little better at doing the kinds of things that tend to earn you calls. They go to the basket more frequently. than especially Michigan State teams of recent vintage. So, like I'll give you a prime example. A lot of people were upset. There was a lot of debate online about, I don't recall whether it was in the first half or early in the second, but there was a play where AJ Hogard took the ball down the lane. Um, and it looked like there might be some contact. He missed a layup, and then Rutgers comes down the other end, and a somewhat similar looking play on the surface, he gets called for the foul, and you see him gesture like, what about down there? They replayed it. I didn't think there was a lot of contact. Omarui, principle of verticality, went straight up. He didn't chop down and make contact on AJ. There's some debate as to whether maybe he hip checked him a little bit. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
But whatever, reasonable minds can differ. But the reason I'm raising it is not to say, like in the Purdue game, oh, they were just egregious blown calls. That was one that was very debatable. But you're at home.
Yeah.
History tells us you're going to get a couple of those at least. Yeah. And Michigan State didn't get it there, and they just didn't get any like that. There just weren't any that, not that I can recall, there weren't any plays where like, well, they got the benefit of the doubt on that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, yeah, I guess I'm trying to think well, the other thing I was thinking about too, to kind of go back a little bit back to the 5 of Carson, Cooper, and Kohler, as you see Kohler and Cooper emerge and get better and more comfortable, you start to see, I think the glimmers of not a huge weakness at the 5. Like, I think you can imagine the ceiling of this team maybe a little more than we thought. I think we're neither of us expecting Madi to be suddenly, offensive force. But boy, if you get more out of those two guys, you can see that as maybe not a strength, but certainly not a as big a weakness or sort of hole offensively as maybe they've been in the past.
Yeah, look, here's the way that I think about it. And there's again a lot of debate in Spartan land about this as recently as the Purdue game. There won't be much of it tonight, and the reason there won't be much of it is because Jaxon Kohler scored 12 points, which tells you something about what the level of understanding is. At Michigan State, at least, where you have to start if you want to really understand it, if you want to understand what Tom Izzo wants and what he sees, you start the analysis in 2 areas. Actually, I'm going to say 3. How does your 5 defend? How does he rebound? And what kind of a screener is he? Because pick and roll is such a huge part of the MSU offense, most teams' offenses these days, but definitely in East Lansing. I would submit that in those 3 areas, Michigan State's play at the 5 over the long haul, the course of this season, has been reasonably good.
Yeah, I agree.
Because in those 3 areas, Madi Sissoko has been good. Now, it's been less good and less consistent with the other 2 guys, the 2 freshmen. But, today we saw, Carson Cooper's on like a 3 or 4 game run where he's playing pretty well, doing the things, the limited things that you're asking him to do. Jaxon Kohler had a great game today. But I don't view it as this massive hole this year. I don't think it has been. You have to now if where you want to go is, well, Michigan State should always have a center who's capable of doing those things and also being a double-digit scorer. Okay, fine. I guess. But I've seen Michigan State have very good teams that didn't have a player like that. That has happened. They've been fortunate enough to have a lot of good guys at the 5, but it's not exclusively been the case. So I don't accept the premise that the 5 has been some massive, massive problem. The simpleton's way of viewing it is to say, well, the opponent's center scored X amount of points and we only got whatever we got, and there's a big gap. But that's a simpleton's understanding of the game. There's a lot more to it than that. And as I say, so I don't accept that it's been a massive problem by any means. And I think it continues to have the potential to get better. for the reasons that we've been talking about, that you're starting to see these freshmen, not that it's going to be a perfectly pure, smooth, linear, hockey stick move up,
Right,
for those two guys,
exactly.
but they're showing you signs of what they're capable of doing in different ways, but they're both showing it. So you put that together, and maybe you get some of the recent defensive inconsistency out of Madi. The rebounding thing again, look, he was terrible tonight. There's no debating it. But I've only got to go back 3 days to see him, believe it or not, in a game where Edey had as many rebounds as he had. Look at the team statistics and understand what kind of role Madi Sissoko played in that. In Michigan State, battling that team to a standstill on the glass. So I don't have to go very far back to see him doing the job that he's done most of this year. So I'm not going to let one game throw me into a panic about Madi Sissoko as a rebounder. Or as a defender, because he struggled in both areas today, but he won't the rest of the way. That much I can assure you.
Yeah. Well, we hit the track record. Yeah. Yeah. Talking about the guards play today, it's almost something you don't even talk about because it's just so consistent. AJ, 7 assists, 4 turnovers. A couple of those turnovers were kind of boneheaded, but still played a pretty solid game from the floor. He led the team in scoring 16 points. 3 of 5 from 3, which was surprising, especially even hit the hand grenade shot. 5 of 6 from the line. Played 31 minutes. And I thought, this is one of Jaden Akins after that first stint on the floor, he was pretty terrible. The first, 4 minutes or whatever it was. After that, he was pretty great in defense. 4 steals. He had 3 threes. He was 3 of 6 for 3, 5 rebounds, 2 of them offensive, 4 assists, a turnover. And a block. And that where he picked McKay's pocket and ran down it. And then what's so impressive is when someone can dribble and still run faster than a guy who's got no ball to carry to handle. That's so right. Impressive what he did.
That is a very rare ability. I really like Jaden's game tonight, and the team as a whole. What I thought was interesting, we talked about it in the pregame that, listen, Rutgers forces turnovers. I mean, they're aggressive defensively. They generate a lot of steals. Michigan State, you got to be strong with the ball. And I thought they were pretty good in that way. What I didn't see coming, because we haven't seen it for a long time. We talked about this at the start of the year that, boy, this Michigan State team looks like it might be capable of generating more forced turnovers than we typically see. Because they've got guys, Tyson Walker, we all know about, but Akins was showing signs of it. Hogard shows signs of it. Holloman shows signs of it. I really did think, well, they might be able to generate more of those forced turnovers than we usually see out of an MSU defense, because it happened early and then it kind of stopped happening. Maybe in conjunction with Akins getting hurt.
I think that had a lot to do with it. Yeah.
But man, was it evident tonight. I mean, that was as aggressive a Michigan State defense. Whatever you want to say about the defensive rebounding effort and how Rutgers kind of punked MSU there and on its offensive glass, and I'm not going to disagree, especially early. But man, was Michigan State aggressive defensively.
Yeah,
it was huge.
6 minutes. The last 6 minutes is where they just
they imposed their will.
They were just destroying Rutgers. I mean, once they got up to around 10 points, it was over. I mean, Rutgers couldn't get anything going. And I guess the other question defensively is, we'll talk about defense for a second again. When it comes to the threes for Rutgers, they had plenty of open looks. It wasn't like they had nothing. But it was almost like one of those games where you make it difficult early, and then you never let the team get in rhythm, and they're just like rushing when they finally even get one that's partially open. Like Spencer, who is 40+% shooter, 45%,
almost 50%, 47%,
1 for 8. So he won't be anymore. So he's 1 for 8, 3 for 14 from the field overall with 8 points. He was pretty terrible. I mean, and even when he was open, he was at that point, he was just missing them. I don't know. I mean, I guess
I will say this. I thought Michigan State over the course of 40 minutes played a very good defensive game, but they dodged several bullets with Cam Spencer. That is one thing in the first half I'm talking about. In the second half really wasn't that way. But in the first half, there were some coverage breakdowns where MSU had that kid wide open. And as we talked about in the pregame, he is the one guy you cannot let get open. Somebody's got to stay with him. If you're switching, the switches have to be executed immaculately. You can't get lulled to sleep. You got to be conscious of backdoor cuts, but you can't let that allow him to get sufficient room to get an easy look at a three. And Michigan State broke down several times. It was stuff to do with switching. It was mental breakdowns. But they dodged several bullets. It was the one thing that I thought, I don't know how much credit I can give Michigan State for this. He's just missing shots. And look, this happens, they haven't played a lot of road games. Now he did play a road game and hit a huge shot to nail down the win over Purdue in West Lafayette. So it's not like he's never been in a hostile Big Ten environment, but it's when you got to do it time after time after time. And, you don't have to get up for one of these. You got to get up for 10 of them. Your luck may run out, and his luck ran out tonight. I mean, It was a struggle for him. I think Michigan State in the second half, I'm pretty happy with the job they did, but they got lucky in the first half. They really did, because everything else they did, I was happy with. The rest of those guys that took threes, those guys want to load up and fire, let them. And it's funny, the only other guy who, in terms of efficiency, is a guy you'd worry about is Mulcahy, and he didn't even attempt any tonight, which is not surprising. Because
he had one or two where he could have, and he still he didn't really.
And he is just reticent to take that shot. Now look, the fact that he's shooting 39% on the season from out there may be in part, and probably is in part, a result of him being very, very cautious in terms of his shot selection.
Wide open, sort of. Yeah.
But everybody else, right? Hey, load up and fire, man. And Caleb McConnell, who has been awful, I think he's like 21% coming into the game, had their only make until the last minute when Spencer finally got one to go.
And he had it early.
He did.
It was like the first 2 minutes of the game, and then
very early.
They missed the next 16 shots.
I will admit, when I saw that one go down and the ease with which
I was worried too.
Rutgers was scoring, I had flashbacks to the last. Now, granted, both of those games I'm talking about were at the rack, but I had flashbacks to those two games where Rutgers just tore them up, and another bad shoot last year, especially another bad shooting Rutgers team couldn't miss because MSU let them get going, but it didn't go to pass that way over the course of 40 minutes, thankfully. But look, other than the way they defended Cam Spencer in the first half, and they weren't made to pay for it, I thought Michigan State's defensive game was really, really good.
Yeah, they were good. And Breslin Center remains still one of the few arenas in Big Ten that Rutgers has never won in. So
correct. There's
hold
three
on to
of
that
them
for another year. Yep.
There's MSU, Ohio State, and Michigan that they've never won at. Everywhere else, those streaks will be over with in short order because
I think so.
Steve Pikiell, as we talked about, he's got a real program there now, and they're just getting better. So I don't think those streaks are going to last much longer. But hey, glad to extend it for another year, right?
Absolutely. I'll send it as long as they let us. Then the last thing I want to talk, the other thing I was talking about with Graham Couch is he said, it's interesting that Rutgers had really good numbers this season defensively, and they were giving, I think, less than 30% from 3-point line. But he said, he's watched a number of games, and I admit I haven't watched a lot of Rutgers games. He said, even when the Iowa game, he said they're leaving good shooters wide open a lot of these games, and the shooters just aren't hitting them. And so he was kind of surprised that it was 29%. And then this game, Michigan State had plenty of open looks, and they just buried them. And so it was sort of like, oh, well, maybe Rutgers has just been kind of lucky for a while too. I mean, look, who knows? I mean, a lot of these things are true.
The standard belief in basketball analytics is that 3-point percentage against is primarily a luck stat.
Sure.
So he's got a point in saying that. What you'd have to look at, and I don't recall going deeply into the numbers because frankly, Rutgers' defensive profile across the board was very, very good. There was no reason to, but the safest way of analyzing how good a team's 3-point defense is do they limit attempts, not percentage against, because teams can get hot and they're, and of course the theory is, when you're talking about shots from that range, sometimes it can be a well-defended shot. It still falls,
Right.
and it can be an open shot and it doesn't fall, as we were talking about with Cam Spencer, right? It's just a little more luck dependent and less consistent game to game than, say, the way that a team defends against twos, where you see much more of a game to game consistent level, right? That's the theory, at least. So I would not disagree with that. I do think, though, Michigan State got those open threes, not so much because Rutgers was just content in giving them up. I don't think they were. It was that Michigan State really moved. The ball moved tonight. They passed their way and drove and kicked their way into open looks, so they earned that. I don't think that was Rutgers just saying, hey, if you make them, we tip the hat. Not the case, not in my opinion.
Right. No, I agree. But I guess, to my point is, I think that Rutgers was not as hard getting a shot as I thought it would be this game. There are plenty of opportunities to get them up. And so, I remember watching the Iowa game, and Iowa was really terrible for quite a while. And then they ended up beating Rutgers, but I don't know, I guess.
Well, I think the thing is what Rutgers did not do, and what really their system is not built to do. Rutgers wasn't selling out to take away the three, right? So when you do that, and Rutgers, despite the fact they generate a lot of turnovers, they're not like a huge, like full tilt ball pressure team either,
right.
So if you allow Michigan State to run its stuff where they're not under constant duress, there's a reasonably good chance, with the way this team can move the ball and the quality of passers that it has, like not just at the point, but all around, there's a pretty good chance they're going to get a fair number of open looks, So I think some of that you just simply credit the way Michigan State played. And look, that's something that's really worth celebrating in this game. Rutgers came in as the number 3 defensive team in the country. And I will note, they pointed this out of the broadcast. I believe today has to be the first exception to this. Every other game this year they've played in, they've held their opponents under their seasonal scoring average. Well, not today. So Michigan State was able to do that just in terms of raw point totals. And then you look at the way that they shot, 47.3% from the floor against that team. That is phenomenal. 12 for 22 from 3. Look, that played a big role in it. And we're going to talk about it again in a minute, but as we've said, the 3 is a big part of what MSU looks to do. And it has to be better than it's been over the last 3-4 games. And it was, but I can also say they were due for this. The team just shoots. They got too many good shooters to keep struggling the way that they were. So this was more or less inevitable.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we break for just a moment for an ad from a sponsor, and then we'll come back with the Nudge Printing Keys to the Game. All right. So the Nudge Printing Keys to the Game, we'll start with Cam Spencer. Cam Spencer was coming in shooting, 47% from 3. He was averaging a lot of points a game. I think it was almost 20 points a game, wasn't it?
Recently.
13.9.
14 a game over the course of the season, and he's their leading scorer.
2.5 steals a game. He had 3, so he managed to do that. But turnover ratio, well, he averaged 3-1. He had 3 assists and 1 turnover, but he was 3 of 14 from the field, 1 of 8 from 3, 1 from 1 of the line. I mean, he was well neutralized. I mean, some of it was luck, like we talked about before, but they did a great job defensively and not really giving many opportunities in the second half.
Yeah, I was, we talked about first half, I think MSU dodged some bullets. Second half, I think they actually earned it. I think they really checked well. Jaden Akins saw a lot of him. Tyson Walker had him a little bit. Those guys guarded, and he's a tough cover. Look, if you're watching Big Ten basketball with any regularity, and you've seen Rutgers, you know this. Cam Spencer is legit. Like, he has had a great season so far, and you couldn't tell by the way things unfolded tonight because Michigan State largely did a really good job with him, and when they didn't, he wasn't able to cash in on opportunities he got.
Yeah, so next key to the game, threes. I think no question about that. Michigan State is now shooting almost 38% as a team. Individually, I mean, when Hogarth's hitting 3 of 5, you're in trouble. He's now over 30%. He was at 27 coming to the game.
Wow.
Tyson Walker's at 42%. Joey Hauser's 41%. Akins is 41%. So, the game certainly helped their individual stats for the season. I mean, what can you say? They hit 12 3-pointers on, and they shot over 55% from 3 for this game. So, I mean, you can't ask for much more than that.
No, you certainly can't. And look, they were due. They were due for this.
They're too good a shooting team. Yeah.
Not necessarily making 12 of them in a game, but to shoot this kind of percentage after I thought they missed. They were pretty good in the second half against Purdue, but in the first half they struggled. They couldn't get anything going against Illinois because Illinois took them away. And then the Michigan game was another example of that, where they had a ton of good looks. I mean, Michigan can't guard anybody. And Michigan State had great looks and just missed a ton of them. So if you believe that this team has good shooters and a number of them, which I think we both do, then you had to believe, all right, at some point, they're going to have a game that goes the other way, and they're just going to go off on somebody. I wouldn't have necessarily picked that game to be Rutgers, but it was, and it was timely, and they needed it. The fact that they were able to get so many shots up, so many good looks against this defense, that was very impressive in and of itself, too. Totally apart from the percentage they shot was the number of them. When you make 12 threes to your opponent's 2 for 17, I mean, that's going to be even if the opposing team is lights out in every other respect, that's going to be really difficult to overcome. And Rutgers was not lights out in every other respect. So it ended up as an easy win for MSU on the scoreboard, at least.
And I would say, watching the game, I felt like there was one bad 3-point attempt, and that was the one that Hogarth ended up hitting, that sort of hand grenade when, the end of the shot clock with someone in his face. Every look was pretty wide open. I mean, they're all good looks, and I feel like we don't always have that every game, and so you'd expect them to shoot 50+% for having just basically wide open threes. And I think a lot of it is credited to, that may not even be credited from assist standpoint for Hogarth, but a lot of times he'd go in the lane, draw on, 2 defenders, so he'd have like 3 people around him, kick back out and get passed once or twice around the perimeter, and then it'd be wide open in the corner. And I think that's where they really feasted on Rutgers to get those open threes.
In the NHL, he'd be credited for assists on those, the hockey assists, right? The pass that leads to the pass. But that's always been such a huge part of what Michigan State tries to do offensively. That's how they want to play, is that kind of that high quality ball movement. And, we're in situations where a guy might have a good look, but he gives it up to somebody else who gets a great one. And Michigan State had a lot of those tonight that they cashed in on, where somebody had a guy, Jaden Akins did it a couple times. Hogarth did it. They had a lot of guys do it where somebody had an open look, but they kicked it to someone who had an even more open look. And maybe it was a situation where somebody had an open look from 2, but they kicked to somebody who was wide open from 3, which the math dictates that's a smart play often. And Michigan State really made hay in that regard. So it was impressive.
The number 3 key to the game was penetration. Paul McCahey tore Michigan State apart last year, just sitting in the lane and doing whatever he wanted to do, scoring and also then kicking out to people who are hitting threes. Well, obviously they didn't hit threes today. He's got his points. He got 12 points and 5 of 8 shooting, but didn't shoot a ton. He got in a couple like clever like post moves and stuff, but for the most part, he didn't do a whole lot in there. And he had 4 turnovers as well to go with his 4 assists.
That was big. And his were forced turnovers as well. They did the job. I didn't feel like Rutgers was living in the lane at all. And whereas Michigan State was a lot. And that was a big difference from that game at the rack last year where Mulcahy just was murder on them. He showed you some of what he can do. I mean, he had one great post move in the first half. I think it was Hogard was guarding him where he could sense Mahdi was starting to slide over. And so he just spun the opposite direction and hit a nice, 5-6 foot bank shot. Look, he's a very good player. We said it in the pregame. I really like the way he plays. And I think he's very tough to deal with because of his vision, his ball skills, and his size. It's a tough package to contain. But Michigan State, for the most part, did a really good job on him.
Yeah, and I think, when it comes to point guards, we always talk about, do you feel like you're controlling the tempo, are you in comfort zone? And Rutgers never looked like they were comfortable on offense. It always kind of had a little bit of helter-skelter, which probably contributed to the fact they were missing threes. They were never feeling like, they never looked like they were ever in any sort of good set, except maybe the very first few minutes of the game. And even then, they were missing everything. They just were getting, 2-3 offensive rebounds, I feel like, every other possession, and capitalizing on people being out of position. Hats off to Michigan State for really tamping that down. So the number 4 key to the game was turnovers. And, Michigan State's been sort of coming up a little bit in turnovers, double digits. They had 10 today, but they weren't, I don't think any of them led to like fast break points for Rutgers. Rutgers had 11 turnovers, so there was no advantage there. And I think,
let's see.
Nice job of not giving up fast break points. It's like 11-10 or something.
Somehow
advantage to Rutgers.
Somehow Rutgers outscored Michigan State 13-8 in points off turnovers. But boy, it sure didn't feel that way to me.
Well, it's just, it's just like when was it Purdue that scored 28 points off turnovers or something like that? But they didn't have there were like no live ball. It was not like anything actually led to turnovers. It just happened like, a shot clock violation, they score.
They got one or two buckets that way early during that early flurry where they got out to an 8-point lead.
Yes.
But then it stopped. And we did talk about that in the pregame, that the problem with live ball turnovers against this team is that you could be giving them easy chances to score where they're not having to operate against half court defense. And if they have to play against set defenses, they're probably going to struggle because they don't shoot the ball well. And boy, what did we see? They were going against half court defense the vast majority of the game, and they didn't shoot well.
Yeah, they're pretty terrible that way. So the 5th key to the game, which I guess will give Michigan State, I don't know, would you give them an F+ maybe? Defensive rebounding?
Only because of Jaxon Kohler.
And I would say that the one thing about that, you kind of felt maybe at the end of the game, Rutgers got a little worn down because they were not as effective on the offensive glass like the last 5 minutes. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's just Jaxon Kohler, fresh, playing 23, only 23 minutes. He was able to corral him. And then I think part of it, they just weren't getting shots up because Michigan State was stealing the ball a lot late too. So, but anyway, that was obviously a fail, but they hit enough threes and did all the other things which are necessary to get a pretty easy victory in the end.
Yeah, look, I mean, Izzo will have something to just pound on them heading into Bloomington. That performance on the defensive glass, it's a shame because it's an area, and we've talked about it a lot here. It's an area where Michigan State really needed to improve on from the last couple seasons. And up until today, they really had. And again, you don't have to go any further back than Monday night. And the job they did against Purdue in that phase of the game was tremendous. It was a big part of why Michigan State had a chance to win that game, was that Purdue was not living off second and third chances the way Rutgers did for part of tonight, But look, this is the Big Ten, and not every team is going to rebound on the offensive glass like this, but there are always a number of them that do. And so You do the job against one opponent, great. You got somebody else coming in next that can test you in very similar ways. And Michigan State just got caught by that. They got bit by that tonight. But hopefully we're going to see that as a blip on the screen.
Well, Michigan State with a win ties Rutgers for second place at 5-3 in the Big Ten as the standings are as we're recording this. Purdue at 7-1, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Michigan all at 4-3, and then Illinois at 4-4. It's a big win in the Big Ten standings to keep maintain contact. Malik Hall's coming back at some point. Things happen, and so overall thoughts of the game.
Well, I mean, look, it was a great performance overall by Michigan State. A lot of good things happened. In terms of the Big Ten race, I was commenting on the Spartan Mag board about this. Right now if you look at the standings, Purdue seems they got a 2-game lead in the loss column. So they seem to be already putting a little distance between themselves and each other. And that's the way a lot of people saw it. That's what the rankings would tell you. There's a significant gap. But I would remind people, Purdue really could very easily have 4 losses in the league already. I mean,
right.
They had that game against Nebraska in Lincoln where they were beaten. Trying to remember who else it was that had them. There was somebody else that had them, and then of course the Michigan State game. So Purdue may end up with a gap between them and everybody else in the standings. But when I look at how they actually play game to game, I could see them getting beaten on Friday at the Big Ten tournament, in their first game in a quarterfinal against an 8 or a 9 seed. That absolutely could happen, and I think any range of possible outcomes is possible for them in the NCAA tournament, because whatever, my point being, they may end up winning this thing with some ease in terms of how the standings look. But I am absolutely convinced there is not a significant gap between them and any one of a number of other teams, which would include a healthy Michigan State, by the way.
Right.
In this league. And so trying to extrapolate as to what that's going to mean for March, I do not have a lot of faith in the idea of Purdue being the juggernaut and everybody else kind of significantly worse than they are. I don't think that's the case, no matter what the standings may say.
What's interesting about Purdue is they have 12 games remaining, obviously, and 7 of those are at home and 5 are on the road. So they are 4-0 on the road in the Big Ten and 1-1 at home. Is that strange?
Yeah, it is. And I guess that would be, though, if you assume that traditional elements hold true, that would be further support for the idea they're probably going to win the league. Because if they've got that many home games left, they're going to be very tough to beat in West Lafayette. We know that, despite the fact that Rutgers has already got them there. I don't think that necessarily means that suddenly Mackey is vulnerable.
Right.
But again, it's not going to mean very much to me in terms of how I assess them versus some other teams come March, be it in the Big Ten tournament or, the NCAA tournament. Right now, the Big Ten is exactly the way we thought it would be.
Yeah.
In that there isn't a whole hell of a lot of difference from team to team and even game to game. I mean, as we've been recording this, I've had Illinois and Indiana on, and Illinois had won 4 straight games, had been playing well, seemed to have broken out of their funk. Meanwhile, Indiana, even though they won their last game against Wisconsin, that's a team that's been in turmoil. They're down 2 starters from the beginning of the season due to injury. And boy, you just have no reason in a game in Champaign to expect anything other than an Illinois victory. Not only does Indiana win, they blow them out and dominated them really almost wire to wire. I mean, they were in control of that game about 10 minutes in, and it never really let up. So you try to figure it out.
Yeah, well,
from game to game. Michigan tonight plays a Maryland team that they beat by 35 in Ann Arbor. Now, granted, you're going on the road, but again, Maryland, a team that's been struggling mightily. And, their home court advantage right now isn't what we're traditionally used to it being, because I think their fan base is still kind of reeling and trying to figure out if they can get enthused about this new era, new regime. But Michigan goes in there and gets handled.
Yeah.
So it's just hard to see a lot of slivers of daylight between these teams. The shame of it is for Michigan State. I honestly believe a full strength Michigan State with Malik Hall is right now my pick as the second best team in this league. And you can say I got my Homer glasses on, whatever, but I firmly believe that. I think it's true. Now, they don't have him right now. We don't know when, if they're going to get him back. I think the team as it's currently constructed has certainly shown us one thing. The defense is probably fixed, even without Malik. I mean, this is now 2 straight games without him, against Purdue and against Rutgers, where they've defended very, very well. So I'm reasonably confident that with this group, they're going to continue to be, at the very least, a solid defensive team, and maybe better than that. So that's a good sign. What that means is that they're fully capable of still winning a lot of games. But, as I think we talked about when the news broke about Malik, you probably put Big Ten title contention thoughts to the side for now. And you just concentrate on being the best team you can be by March, hopefully getting Malik back and reacclimated, and then you roll the dice and you see where it takes you.
Yeah.
But I still like this team, and I think they're giving people a lot of reason to like what they're seeing.
They're a fun team to watch. And actually, I misspoke, and Purdue is 5-0 at home on the road and 2-1 at home. What's interesting is 4 of those wins, Nebraska and Minnesota. So you're gonna.
That's true.
Maybe
that's true.
Maybe maybe it's not that impressive. I don't know. And one's Penn State.
This is my point, right? So who are the other games been against? Okay, they played Rutgers, they got beat. They played Michigan State, they maybe should have been beat. Who was the other game? If you're looking at their schedule, I know there was another one.
So they beat Minnesota. Minnesota at home. Then they beat Nebraska on the road in overtime. Then they lost to Rutgers at home. Won at Ohio State by 2.
That was the one. It was at Ohio State. And look, Ohio State is 2-5 now, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're in a tailspin.
They've lost 5 straight. Their season seems to be skidding into oblivion. You know who I don't want to be? And I haven't even looked at their schedule. I don't want to be the team that plays Ohio State next. Because the way this season is going, they're probably going to lay a whipping on somebody. But that's the thing. If you go by the standings, Purdue, that's 5 of their games have been played against the 3 worst teams in the conference, right?
Yeah.
You said 2 against Minnesota, 2 against Nebraska, 1 against Ohio State.
Oh, and Penn State, Ohio State, Rutgers, and Michigan State.
So I mean, really, Rutgers and Michigan State, they played teams that are in the upper echelon at the moment, but they haven't seen Illinois, they haven't seen Indiana, which is always
that 2 of
state
those,
rivalry.
Home and home there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It remains to be seen how things sort out. But regardless of what happens with Purdue, I like where this Michigan State team is. I like what we've seen from them now in 2 full games without Malik Hall.
Right.
That it doesn't feel to me like the sky is falling at all.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there in a game where it was a rainy, kind of murky day, getting to the same as a nice outcome, and where the horn broke for, I don't know, it was like 10 minutes in that game.
That.
Yeah, I actually turned to my friend who was seeing, and I said, boy, this blows. And he said, this is what your wife has to deal with all the time? I said, yeah, that's pretty much what it's like. So I apologize. But anyway,
one quick teaser before we go. So,
let's do it.
And I've already mentioned this on the Spartan Mag board, but I might as well mention it here for those who don't read that. So we recorded an interview last night with MSU 2023 recruit Garrick Normand, which is going to run next week at some point. We've got to get through this condensed schedule
It's a grind
of games, because with Indiana on Sunday, we can't really run it yet because we don't want to slip through the cracks. It's too good. And trust me, I'll just tease with this. You are going to want to hear this because he is a great interview already as a 17, 18-year-old kid. And for an MSU fan, it is going to be enjoyable, to say the least, to listen to this one, because this is a guy who's got a great deal of enthusiasm for life in general, it seems to me. For Michigan State basketball in particular, he seems legitimately thrilled to be a part of this program. And he's got a lot of interesting things to say that you're going to want to hear. And he's got a sense of humor to boot.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a really, really good one. I encourage everybody who's hearing this, do yourself a favor when we roll that one out next week. Give it a listen.
Absolutely. Or you can watch online too, or you can go to our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and like there. You can also watch. Most of our videos are just audio, but the interviews we have had with actual video with people on it. So it's a different way to enjoy the show. And, that's why I hope you support the show and you like it. I mean, aside from listening and sharing with your friends, that's what we can bring all this extra stuff, and it makes it fun for us too. So, well, next will be Indiana. The preview will be coming out soon. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.